move on to the next part, which is the afternoon session. So allow me to introduce myself. My name is Luciana Thuo. I'm a member of ICJ. I have worked with ICJ since 2012 as a member, and I am very happy to also support the work that the Foundation does in collaboration with ICJ. My assignment this morning is to moderate this panel, which is going to look at the current technological revolution, what policies and what regulations are needed to guarantee public security and protect freedoms and democracy. To do this, I have a panel with me, and I will introduce them, starting with the person to my right. So I'm joined by Grace Bomu, who is with the Data Privacy and Governance Society of Kenya. And on my left is Sylvia Katua, who is a chairperson of the board, Siasa Place. And to my furthest left is Tlengiwe Dube, who is the project manager, Expression, Information and Digital Rights Unit at the Center for Human Rights, the University of Pretoria. So this gathering is happening at a time where we can all agree that technological revolution is reshaping how we communicate, how we organize, how we protest, and how we vote. So what this has done is has given us tremendous opportunities, but it also forces us to ask tough questions about the intersection of rights, freedoms, and democracy. So to set the context, one of the things we saw last year, 2024, is that officially 2024 was declared the worst year on record for internet shutdowns globally. So across Africa, we had 21 shutdowns in 15 countries. And the main reason that was cited by authorities was elections, protests, and in Kenya, we had even national exams as a basis for shutting down the internet. So in Kenya, in both 2023 and 2024, Telegram was blocked so that people don't share exams. So we also saw with 2024 protests, and I'm sure Kenyans in the room have seen the snapshots of text messages between politicians about how internet connectivity was slowed down during the Reject Finance Bill protests last year. And this raises very serious concerns about how we communicate, how much the state is involved in privacy issues, but also how do we create accountability. So over the last few years, Kenya and Africa broadly has faced very serious questions about intrusive surveillance. So we've had reports of software being used to spy on Kenyans, with Pegasus spyware reports being reported in 2018. And in 2020, we've also seen in Nairobi, it's impossible to drive without being captured by CCTV somewhere. That CCTV has facial recognition, has license plate recognition. How is this information being used? We've also seen concerns about Safaricom being used to monitor and giving away information to intelligence agencies to track people and to have them abducted. Regionally, we've seen the African Commission also take note of these abuses. And in 2024, the African Commission adopted Resolution 580, and states were called upon to guarantee open and secure internet access before, during, and after elections, and to refrain from shutdowns. So there's a paradox which is clear. Technology is transforming the democratic space, but regulation and practice are tilting more towards control than towards protection. So the question we're going to be trying to answer today, which is a very simple but a very urgent question, is what policies and regulations can guarantee public security, but also protect freedoms and democracy? It's not an either-or situation. So this stellar panel, which I have with me, is going to help me dissect this. And we'll start by setting the scene, and I'll ask each of them in turn to speak to a question, and then we'll have an audience engagement segment after. So I'll start with Grace to my right, and I'll start with Kenya, and then we'll move to Thlengi, who will speak about the region. So with Kenya is one of the few countries in Africa which has a full data protection statute, the Data Protection Act. But there's been concerns about the enforcement of the Data Protection Act. So in Kenya, do regulators here truly have the independence and the capacity they need to enforce the law?
Thank you for the question, and good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I think this is a question without a straight yes or no answer, because if you look at reports on data protection enforcement. Kenya ranks quite highly in Africa because it is one of the countries that has had a lot of determinations. It is one of the countries where data subjects, which is just normal citizens like you and me, have been compensated for data breaches or for misuse of their data. Yet at the same time, it is also a country where everybody knows and complains about misuse of their data, particularly by public agencies which hold vast amounts of personal data. So it might sound cliche, but in Kenya and across all of Africa, this has been quite a pain point for many people, that there is not as much enforcement when it comes to public agencies. And, you know, this is not just something that affects the elite, because I know that a lot of you and even your friends and relatives, even in the villages, have had complaints to do with, for example, being registered in a political party that you have absolutely no affiliation to, or, you know, your data being used to profile you and your political, and, you know, try to guess your political affiliation, or to add you to WhatsApp groups for, you know, welfare issues and so on. So as much as those people may not call it data protection issues, they know that there is a problem because they have been profiled, or they have been added to issues they were not related to. Yet there has not been enforcement that is, in Kiswahili they say iliwe funzo, that deters others from doing that. So it is yes and no answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. I want to expand the conversation to a regional perspective, and this is where Thlengi will help us. Thlengi, you sit at the Center for Human Rights, and you interact a lot with the African Commission and other African mechanisms. So I want you to speak to the question of enforcement capacity and this balance between legitimate security concerns and the capacity to allow people to express themselves. As I've said, we've seen a lot of internet shutdowns across Africa. It's not a Kenyan situation only. So how do we draw the line between the legitimate interest of a country in protecting its security, which is usually the main reason why they shut down the internet, and outright repression? How far is too far by the government?
Thank you. My name is Thlengi Dube, based at the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria, working on digital rights, freedom of expression, access to information, all things technology and human rights. So yes, the work around supporting the African Commission, especially Human and People's Rights, is one of our key mandates. And we've also, I think this year, hosted something around internet shutdowns. And it's really concerning that on the continent we are seeing a lot of that happening. But where the African Commission is coming from is that as the body that has been mandated to oversee the implementation of the African Charter on the continent, it also looks into issues around online rights and access to the internet. So in 2019, the African Commission developed what I can still refer to as a very progressive normative standard, the Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information. I think I say it's progressive because I was also part of the process of developing it. So if you check on that normative standard, which is a declaration, you'll find that the African Commission acknowledged the importance of the internet as far as the realization of protection and promotion of human rights is concerned. And specifically, it says that states shall recognize that universal, equitable, affordable and meaningful access to the internet is necessary. In this context, it was for, realization of freedom of expression and access to information. And when you go to the preamble of that document itself, it also says that the same rights that we enjoy offline, we should enjoy those rights on an equal basis in the online and offline. And speaking to internet shutdowns, it then says that states, so this instrument was drafted to address states. So these are principles that define, state obligations. So it was saying that states shall not condone or any disruption, engage or condone any disruption of access to the internet or any other digital technologies for segments of the population or an entire section of the population. That is the standard. And when it comes to the practice now, we are seeing exactly the opposite of what the African Commission set as a standard or set as a benchmark. And this we have seen still in the same document. It says that, yes, these rights, they are fundamental rights, but they can be limited, which comes the issues around, they can be limited for national security reasons, for instance. But for a limitation to, pass the international human rights standard, there is a three-part test. The issues of legality, where the restriction provided has to be clear, it has to be precise in terms of the law, it also has to serve a legitimate aim, which can be national security. Also the issue around necessity and proportionality as well, is the three-part test. But when you look at the internet shutdowns that have been, that we have seen on the continent, is there any that passes that test? All of them, really, they fail that test dismally. So that's the reality on the ground, where we see that it's in the context of an election in Senegal. That's the time when you need people to access information, to engage on election-related matters. There are protests. It's a right to protest. And the access to the internet facilitates the right to protest, because we protest offline and online as well. If I am Kenyan and Kenya is involved in a protest and I'm based in the UK, should I not be protesting from the UK where I'm based? And engage with the people on Kenya on ground? How then do I engage with my fellow citizens who access to internet has been compromised or has been shut down completely? And you're in Nigeria, there are protests in Nigeria, there we saw what happened to the point of litigation, which is not supposed to be even the case. And we've seen in Uganda as well, the 2021 elections as well, and then a very sad set of circumstances in Ethiopia, the Tigray region. I remember seeing an athlete who was celebrating having won, but they could not communicate simply with their family because there was an internet shutdown back at home. So it affects, just even to the very basics of who we are as people, just to communicate with your family members as well. And in Sudan, the military coups, where authorities, shut down mobile internet and restricting social media. And now you are having a situation where you are unable to share and receive real-time information. So to answer your question, where do we draw the line? National security is a state obligation. The state is supposed by its nature, it's part of governance system to have national security, but it's a balancing act. Human rights, the duty bearer, when it comes to human rights, the duty bearer is the state. Security is the state. So there has to be a fine balancing act to ensure that, yes, we as citizens, we tread our privacy. In the context of our colleague was talking about, you also spoke about the intelligence and sharing information. So in the context of the whole governance system, you trade your privacy for certain kinds of information in the context of the state undertaking its national security obligations. But that security obligation has to be done, it has to be proportionate to the extent that it doesn't overreach. And where then do we draw the line? We draw the line where national security becomes a pretext for silencing dissent, for blocking transparency, and also for undermining democratic processes. So the state, having its obligation that we acknowledge of state security, must not abuse the state apparatus as well in the name of national security. Thank you.
Thank you, Tlengi. And we can't talk about silencing dissent without talking about the Reject Finance Bill protests in Kenya. And I'm glad we have Sylvia on the panel. And as I said, we've had buzz the last couple of days in Kenya of what exactly transpired between Parliament and the President during the Reject Finance Bill protests and the attempts to stop young people from communicating and galvanizing. And Sylvia, I'd like to speak to the place of the youth in democracy and how central technology is to their role in the process. And it's not just a Kenyan thing, but across the world, we've seen technology being used to mobilize people. We've had Occupy Parliament in Kenya, we've had NSARS in Nigeria. So how do we ensure that regulation by the state protects but does not suffocate civic energy, and particularly where young people are concerned?
Okay, thank you very much, Luciana. My name is Sylvia Katua, and I think maybe the starting point for this is to look at I don't want to say the importance of young people, but the strength that they have, especially in numbers. We have to recognize that not just in Kenya, but across Africa and even across the world, young people are really taking up their place, whether we like it or not. And so how do we support this? And one way that they're doing this is through the digital platforms. Now, when we talk about digital platforms, everyone always thinks about social media. And especially which one? Twitter. Oh, TikTok. Okay, depends on your age, but I think majority of the room talked about Twitter. That's what we always think about. But digital platforms, I'd say, goes beyond social media platforms. Think about last year, or is it even this year, when we had the finance bill and someone came up with this customizable chat GPT that just spits out information that's very accessible, that's very easy, and breaks down very complex legalese that's usually in law. Those are the kind of digital platforms we're talking about. We're talking about websites where people are able to fundraise. We're talking about even utilizing the financial platforms that we have in Kenya, like M-Pesa and the fundraising platforms, rather, that we are able to use. And so young people are using these platforms to be able to mobilize, to be able to create awareness, to be able to inform, to be able to undertake mutual aid and fundraising for those who need it. And you can see it in different ways. During protests, those who need bail get support through these platforms. For example, like Siasa Place currently, we have this ongoing campaign that's a national campaign just to be able to bail out those who've been, I'd say, arbitrarily arrested, especially using the POTA, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, for participating in demonstrations and protests. And so that's how I'd say young people are using it. But of course, there are challenges with all these digital platforms. We have misinformation, where people share information unknowingly, not knowing that this is wrong. We have disinformation, where there's that malicious element of trying to ensure that the wrong information goes to the wrong people, which has several effects. We've seen it affect voter suppression in some countries across Africa, rather inform voter suppression in some countries across Africa. We've seen it even keep people away from protests, even here in Kenya, just through disinformation. And we also have even malinformation, where information is shared wrongly, but for mostly a private or corporate purpose with that and not really for public interest. We have issues to do with impersonation online of different accounts. You see something on X, on Twitter, and you think, oh wow, they've actually said, and you actually look at the account and it's somebody else different. The only difference is an underscore, and you didn't see that. And you've already shared to your family group, and you've told them, well, they've said this. We also have issues to do with throttling. Luciana talked about shutdowns as well in Kenya, especially while we've faced, I think, a shutdown in 2020. Even this year, last year as well, throttling is what we see more often, I'd say that, as well as issues to do with surveillance. Now you find that there's a growing trend where online accounts are tracked, are surveilled, which is then used by the government, by the state, to track down those who are speaking out against ills in the government, if I could say that. And we've seen that, unfortunately, with very many people, which has led to an increase in extrajudicial killings. So there's that connection that we are seeing, and enforced disappearances. Despite these challenges, Luciana asked then, how do we ensure that there's regulation that supports our participation as young people on these online platforms? I liked what you spoke about, because everything she went through was exactly what we need in our laws, you know? We need to ensure that our laws are first aligned with recognized international human rights standards. For example, like the 2019 Declaration on Access to Information would be a good way to ensure all our laws are aligned with that. Even looking at principles of proportionality, principles of reasonableness in how our laws are used in the digital space. Those are things we need to take into consideration. We also need to look into how we as civil society, I'd say as partners, can ensure that these laws are amended, and especially to limit the state's use of surveillance. There is this growing trend that we have noted where national security is used as a guise to surveil, to track, and to infiltrate as well digital platforms and safe online platforms, I'd say, that are used for mobilizing and organizing. How then do we ensure that our laws are aligned with this? Another issue is vagueness. We have so much vagueness in our laws, and so we need clarity. A good example is the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act. If you look at Section 21 and Section 22, in Kenya that is, in Section 21 and Section 22, there are issues about false publication. What counts as false publication? If you look at POTA, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which is normally used again as a way to hold people who have participated in either demonstrations online or even, any sort of talk online that the government would not agree with, if I could say that. POTA is the favorite of the government, because then they're able to hold, arbitrarily arrest people, fast, and then also hold them for a longer period than is usually constitutionally allowed. So we need to have a push towards amending this. Then, of course, strengthening and supporting our data protection commissioner, and the office itself. We need more data protection impact assessments, and I'd say especially on these issues that we are seeing. For example, like the POTA, I'd say we need to see how that has affected right to privacy. And then lastly, I'd also place an obligation on the platforms themselves. And here I'll speak mostly about social media. In terms of platform transparency and openness, how many user requests has Facebook, Meta, for the young ones, has X received on Kenyans' information or Africans' information? So they need to be open about that. They need to be open about how many reports they've received as well on takedowns for specific accounts and in what countries. It would be very interesting to see that kind of data. And also just to be able to push for more, I'd say, support for users to have local language, to be able to report specific accounts, and to be able to lodge appeals in our own languages. I think that would be a good way to look at it. And of course, digital literacy. We cannot have enough of knowledge. There's always so much knowledge we need to inform ourselves, we need to do, and that's a lot of work that partners can do in collaboration. And when I say partners, I mean civil society, in collaboration with the government, especially through the Data Commissioner's Office. I know that's something that they do very well, but also in collaboration with media. That's something that we also need to keep remembering, because media then informs what happens on digital platforms.
Thank you, Sylvia. I think you've given us quite a number of things to think about in terms of where Kenya should be going. And I want to come back to Grace, because her work revolves around data governance. One of the things that works to the disadvantage of the users of these platforms is the fact that the state has a monopoly on the use of force, but also, as you're saying, they're the ones who are tasked with ensuring security. And so one of the things I want you to speak about, Grace, is how your work around data governance systems can be used to push back against state overreach. What tools can we use as citizens to protect our rights and push back, and especially because we have a state that weaponizes the law. So where there's a vague law, the state is very happy to take advantage of the ambiguity or the vagueness in the law to push the national security narrative. So how can your work around data governance systems help citizens push back against this overreach?
I think this is a question that should take us back to issues of democracy. And in the opening panel, the speakers really spoke about democracy being about everyone in the society, because sometimes we tend to think about digital issues as if they're separate from the rest of society. And so, piggybacking on something that Sylvia said, at least in the issue of digital use, young people and digital natives are slightly ahead of the state. And so even outside of the law, I know there are lawyers on this panel, so sometimes we just see every problem that can be solved using the law. But sometimes also we have to think about all the innovations and protect them, all the innovations around data that have led to more transparency. If I can just speak to Kenya, this whole week or for the past, I don't know how many days, there has been this expose on the Social Health Authority and how the payments were made. So I think it's such an innovative way of accessing information and breaking it down to a way that is palatable to a lot of people. And I was in the market the other day and I could see people discussing it in one of the markets. So it's quite, it's broken down to a very basic level. So this just goes to show that apart from the law and changes to the law, we have to take advantage of the innovation that has already been done and the use cases that we are seeing. And we always have to remind ourselves that it involves everyone. And just to add on to pushing back on surveillance and going back to national security, as much as we are moving forward, we also need some historical studies. For example, we as a country have had so much surveillance, and it's the case in many other African countries. What is the nature of that surveillance? What was the impact of that surveillance? So now that it was done maybe in the past 10 years, we spoke about the Terrorism Act that I think came into force in, was it 2015? Yes, when there was a big Security Laws Amendment Act. I'm just about to disclose my age. If I can remember, I think it was just before Christmas when they had the whole overhaul of the security laws in Kenya. I think we need to be told, so what has been the impact? We bought so many systems, we've been surveilled so much, we all had to register our SIM cards. What has been the impact? How much did it cost us? Because some of these things were done using national security closed budgets. Are those systems still in operation? How many people were arrested? How did their cases go? Let's historicize so that we can learn. If somebody was surveilled back then, was it disclosed to them later on? Was there judicial or parliamentary oversight? I know parliamentary oversight is a joke in Kenya, but was there some kind of oversight, or was this just done by one arm of government? So we really have to emphasize on the fact that the whole of society needs to be involved, because it shouldn't just be left to the state and the owners of the platform to drive the agenda of how we benefit from these digital tools. So that is one way in which we can push back, and I'm glad that citizens and groups of citizens are taking small steps to just show or expose the value of, not the value of data, but even, just innovate around all these digital systems that we have. Yeah.
Thank you, Grace. I think one of the conversations that keeps happening whenever an issue comes up, whether it's AI or how we use data, is the best approach in terms of regulation. And I want to bring it back to Thlengi because she brings a regional lens to this conversation. We've seen what the African Commission has done both in 2019 with the declaration and then 2024 again with the resolution 580. What is the best way to handle this issue of surveillance and internet shutdown? Should we be focusing on national regulation, or should we be trying to address the issue as a regional issue? Because it's a regional conversation. What is the best approach that you have found? What has been most effective?
Thank you so much. I will speak to the issues of the weaknesses of the regional mechanism, but also acknowledge their importance. They are quite essential, and I can really for sure make a very strong case for regional mechanisms such as the African Commission, for instance, whether it's on issues of surveillance or internet shutdowns. And especially when you are looking at what they have already done, you can see that, these, like I keep using the word progressive, these standards that do provide guidance to states from top regional perspectives. And if you look at the resolution that you are referring to, 580, the 2024 one, it expands on the declaration, so it draws from the declaration, and the idea is that based on those resolutions or that declaration, then the state, because these standards, whether it's the declaration or it's a resolution or it's a general comment or any other set of normative guidance that the Commission develops, it's to facilitate the implementation of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And the African Charter is the binding human rights instrument of the continent. So then they develop these resolutions, these guidelines. I was just talking to a colleague just before the session started that, when you're looking at the declaration, it's drawing from or expanding on Article 9 of the African Charter. If you go to the African Charter, you will find maybe 1 or 2 sentences on freedom of expression and access to information. So to help the state in its implementation of Article 9 of the African Charter, then the Commission develops a declaration of principles, which then explains what it means by Article 9, so that when they implement, they know that, when it comes to freedom of expression, this is what entails freedom of expression. When it comes to access to information, things like record management, things like proactive disclosure of information, things like whistleblower protection, all that go into the framework of access to information. Because if you leave it just the 2 sentences of the African Charter, they don't provide much information as to what the African Commission meant, although you can find some of it in the jurisprudence of the African Commission. But these standards, they provide that kind of extended guidance. And by having those regional standards, you are trying to prevent also some legal loopholes as well, and regulatory fragmentation. You are trying to rally together the continent to have a similar approach. Yes, we have our differences. There are unique circumstances in Kenya. There are unique circumstances. The Malabo Convention, women's rights, we have the Maputo Protocol. So this provides a basis upon which as a continent we have our own identity as far as human rights from a particular perspective are concerned. So it's a way of also harmonizing the protections. And also, human rights, they cross borders. And because human rights cross borders, the protections also must also cross borders. Look at what we are dealing with right now, issues of, she was talking about misinformation, disinformation, issues now, we have cybercrime. How do we deal with the borders and all that, with the existence of cybercrime? So we need regional approaches to even address those issues. And also having, when we are looking at us activists, civil society organizations and all that, it gives us also a regional basis upon which we can facilitate peer pressure from a regional perspective as well, and regional oversight. Building that collective pressure around an instrument is also very important, so that when an internet shutdown occurs in Sudan, for instance, you have activists also that are advocating for a change of the situation from Somalia or from Malawi or any other country, rallying behind the principles and the norms that we have as a continent. But also, while we have this, normative authority that the regional standards have, there is a big challenge which emanates from the states, number one. The states themselves, they signed the African Charter, they ratified the African Charter, and in terms of the international laws, and principles, there is the principle of Pax Sunt Servanda. You have to implement the agreement in good faith. Are they implementing in good faith? Their ministers of foreign affairs are the ones that went and signed, and in due time they went back and ratified. The next step is now to implement in good faith, and we don't have that happening. And this is a problem for the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. This is a problem for the court. This is a problem for the Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. We were together in the Gambia in 2016, and I was working as an intern at the African Commission. One of the issues that was boggling the African Commission and the other related bodies was the issue of implementation of the decisions of the African Commission or decisions of the African Court. The decisions of the African Commission are recommendations, but they rely on that principle that you signed the African Charter and you have to implement it in good faith. So, but, the decisions the cases are submitted to the African Commission, they are decided, the recommendations, but as far as implementation is, sometimes even during the deciding of the case, during the process, you'll find that the Commission ends up having a default decision based on the submissions of the applicant, because the state does not cooperate in the entire process. Yes, they have signed the African Charter, which requires them to undertake related activities associated with implementation of the African Charter, including when they have violated the rights in the African Charter. Now they have to go before the African Commission in the instance of a case. So we have those challenges of the regional mechanisms, that there is reluctance as far as implementation of the decisions of these mechanisms are concerned. Even the decisions of the African Court, which are binding, by the way. Now we are having a situation where states are reluctant to ratify the protocol that establishes the court or gives the jurisdiction of, the court processes and all that. And so this undermines the effectiveness of these organizations. Resources go into deciding some of these cases. And then when it comes to implementation, because it's one thing to decide on a case, have a very good judgment, but implementation of the judgment is where the aggrieved person gets the remedy. That's where they get that's where the solution comes from. But it can be, the Konate case, if you read it, it's a very very good judgment. But when it comes to if there is no implementation of that judgment, it doesn't really help much. So there's that issue that I wanted to indicate, that the regional mechanisms are good to the extent that the states are cooperative. Yeah.
Thank you, Thlengi. I want to switch gears a bit, and I'll come back to Sylvia, because Sylvia had already raised the downside of digital platforms as purveyors of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. And I want to switch back to the role of the state also as a protector of rights. And Sylvia, I want you to speak to this question of disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. What can the state do in the absence of a regulatory framework, because there is currently not one, whether at the regional or at the local level? What can the state do to protect young people also from misinformation, disinformation, malinformation? And what can civil society do? So we're not just bashing the state for being a violator, but how can we facilitate the state also protect rights by stopping the free flow of information, which is detrimental to national security and democracy?
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's not, as you rightly put it, it's not just the government's obligation only. I think that it should be a multi-pronged approach. Government, civil society, the media, even young people themselves, whether myself, me, Sylvia, or as a group with others, have a part to play with this issue of disinformation, misinformation. We already know, like I said earlier, I think we know the detrimental effects it has, and especially on specific rights. If you think about the right to protest, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, it's already corrupted once you have the wrong information. So then how do we deal with this? The best way, and I think this is the most important way, is promoting the right to access to information. Because we speak about fact-checking. How do we fact-check? We only fact-check with the right data. Where do we get the right data from? Most times from government. But government, we know our governments, especially in Africa. They have the very nice behavior of holding in information that we need, that is even national security level, but they just don't want to give it to us. In Kenya, we have the Access to Information Act, 2016, as well as the regulations, which were recently published, I think last year, if I'm not wrong. And they provide and they facilitate the right to access information under Article 35. We have the Commission on Administrative Justice that supports and facilitates this. Implementation has been gradual, let me say that. We've seen uptake in some counties, especially regarding access to information requests. And so it's to push and support the government towards facilitating these requests, providing a more transparent way for people to seek for these requests. I don't need to do it in a hard copy that's stamped by 10 people in different departments. Online could work. We just need to encourage the government to adopt these things. As well as also capacitating young people on how to ask for these requests. If you don't know, you won't do it. If I know that I can ask for an access to an ATI request, then I know that I can receive data in this way, instead of saying they didn't give us the data and I didn't ask. So that's one way. So that proactive provision of information is one way. Secondly, is also for the government now, I'd say, is this idea of selective application of laws. So you find it's true, maybe the information is wrong, it's actually disinformation, and now we also have the trend where people are paid. There's the financial aspect of disinformation. So you are paid to spread the wrong information online. But instead, the government will use the wrong laws. I mentioned the use of POTA to hold people, and then we also have this rising trend of SLAP. So yes, it is disinformation, yes, it is misinformation, but government, and especially government operatives, if I could say that, who are not pleased with what you've put out, instead of following the right channels, will instigate a strategic lawsuit against you. And these are known as strategic litigation against public participation, SLAPs. So basically, it's just a suit that is going to be expensive for you, is going to waste your time and your resources, and is going to ensure that you spend so much time in court that at the end of it all, you'll just give up. So whether it was actually right information, whether it was wrong information, we'll never really know because you're done. The main goal is just to ensure that you're finished. And so we need to look at how we can also deal with slaps. That's also another angle of looking at it. And then I also spoke about amending repressive laws. Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act again comes into play. Section 21 and Section 22, I have a really big problem with them. This issue of publication of false information. What is this false information? And we've seen it being used very selectively in specific cases. I think even in the recent case of the lady who published this public participation tool online, that was one of the laws that was used to take her to court, even though the case was dropped. And then, of course, we have continuous training for law enforcement agencies just to be able to identify and deal with these things online, and so that they can be able to address these things in a manner that aligns with international human rights standards as well as regional human rights standards. For media, I'd say capacity building of journalists, of editors, of everyone in the newsroom. You need to know how to provide the right information in the right manner on the right platforms, as well as how to deal, how to identify what is actually information that could not be the right information. So we start with capacity building in media houses. Civil society, provide this support to government, to media, and I think this is work that is already ongoing. There are several actors that do this. I know Kiktanet does this. I know Mzalendo Trust does this as well. And there's so many actors, and you'd look at, for example, the Kenya Union of Journalists is one sort of angle you could look at it. You could look at the Association of Media Women in Kenya. There are very many media outfits that we could work with and support. And then lastly, as young people, I think more training on fact-checking. When you look at something online, what's the red flag to look out for before I click send or share on a platform and then actually cause more problems than I intended for it to happen? So just looking at it from that sort of perspective, Luciana, and not in isolation such that each, say, agency in this sense does their own thing separately would be a good way.
Thank you, Sylvia. You spoke about fact-checking. But one of the things that concerns me about misinformation, disinformation, malinformation is this question of virality. By the time you're fact-checking, it's already gone so far, it's very hard to recall it, right? And that's part of why regulation is so difficult. And I want to bring back Grace into this conversation. We try to do these conversations without talking about the disproportionate impact on governance that private tech companies have in many countries. So what I want you to speak to, Grace, is what role should regulation give private tech companies, particularly in acknowledging the fact that they have great influence in how we do our laws, our regulations. In a sense, you can't regulate them without their consent, but we need to also make sure that we have a say in what they allow on their platforms. So how do we balance regulations with this disproportionate influence that they have in many countries?
I tend to think that every actor can be regulated, including these private tech companies. And of course, I see the problem comes in because of the power they hold. I mean, even us, all of us here, for example, we are using one platform or the other. And where I'm saying I know for sure they can be regulated is because if you check all the 54 African countries, especially the ones which are, in the economic regions, I want to avoid saying sub-Saharan Africa, but I don't know. I don't know how else to say this other part of Africa. You will notice that all these countries now have digital taxation. Who is the target for this digital taxation or these digital marketplaces? It is the big tech companies, right? They are the main target. And as much as they tried to fight it back, in the leading countries where there's a lot of use of tech, like Kenya, Nigeria, I can't remember what the case is in South Africa, governments were able to get their way. Why? Because they can see that there's a lot of money moving in these platforms, and so they want a piece of that ngwashi. I don't know if pie makes sense to Kenyans. They want a piece of that ugali or whatever it is. So I think they can be regulated. And I know, like, for example, in Kenya, there's been the conversation on domesticating or implementing the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. I know Kiktanet and I think Article 19 and others were following the process. I don't know how far it's gone, but I know at one point even the Office of the Attorney General had drafted some regulations to guide this process. I also like the fact that in the judicial space, in the judiciary, there's litigation, and the judiciary has asserted that it has a mandate and it has jurisdiction to interpret these new issues that are coming in, including, you know, how tech workers, how tech companies create, we're talking about artificial intelligence in the morning. We normally use the end product, but we don't think about the work behind it, which is part of the litigation that is in court, is about the conditions that workers went through in order to provide these shiny products that we are using even by force. I know now it's by force. Whether you like it or not, your WhatsApp now has AI in it. So I like that fact, and I think this is something that needs to be scaled across the whole continent, even with the regional bodies, so that there can be, to use Lengiwe's top down, so that the bodies can give more guidance on how African countries should approach these issues, so that when the issues, when people take these issues to court, they are not left without recourse, that they are able to, even if they just hedge some of this technology from being applied, as happened with the case of WorldCoin. What happened is that the court was able to, first of all, hedge WorldCoin from, collecting more biometric data, and then eventually even, give a directive that the data should be deleted. I know implementation of that is a different ballgame, but I think that is really progressive of the judiciary. And we're seeing this also really progressive decisions coming from Uganda. Was it Uganda or Tanzania? The one that came out yesterday from the Data Protection Authority there. So I think the gospel needs to go out there that we are not helpless, because even the rights that we have, for example, in our constitutions, they also apply in this digital space, and they just need to be interpreted to the digital situations that we are facing. So we can and should regulate big tech, small tech, all types of tech, because at the end of the day, tech should serve humans and not the other way around. Yeah.
Thank you, Grace, for just a reminder that we're not helpless in this conversation. And I want to come back to Thlengi, because we had spoken about the role of states when it comes to abiding with regional standards, and how these regional mechanisms are only effective if states are willing, in good faith, to implement the findings of the mechanisms or the resolutions. And I want us to speak to this trend that we are seeing, which is a practice in many modern authoritarian systems, where there's a borrowing, in a sense, of bad manners. So you have some countries which were not doing these things before, but are now seeing, oh, other countries are getting away with internet shutdowns, let's also join in. So countries like Mauritius didn't have a history of that before, now they just jumped on board. Small island nations like Comoros jumping on board with that as well, because as you said, no one is stopping states from doing it. So I want you to speak to how do we stop this democratic backsliding, and what is the role of civil society from where you sit in helping to push back against this kind of backsliding and promoting the restoration of freedoms?
The role of civil society, I think, stems from where she was also speaking from, that we need a multi-stakeholder approach. And that approach, including the role of civil society organizations, and civil society are a very important stakeholder, a very strong mandate attached to them when it comes to issues related to digital rights, including internet shutdowns. And I'll also give examples of how we have seen civil society organizations actually contributing. In the different cases that we've heard, there has been some sort of litigation taken up by, civil society organizations. If you look at the case of Zimbabwe, where there was an internet shutdowns because of, following a protest, we saw the role of civil society there, coming through MISA, Media Institute of Southern Africa, and the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights were quite instrumental in taking up the case, and also, if you look at very good jurisprudence that came out of the Uganda situation as well, I think we see the role of civil society there supporting and facilitating litigation and producing very strong or setting judicial precedent. We have the role of the courts, which is important, but that is supported by civil society organizations who are able to support even the drafting of the submissions and all that. Although there will be issues around maybe enforcement. Even in domestic courts, it's still an issue that enforcement, but that push by civil society through litigation is very important to take note. And the other thing is that there's also like the cross-border support, civil society organizations supporting each other across the borders as well. As we have seen that sometimes when there is an internet shutdown that has happened in another jurisdiction, civil society organizations can rally behind and can rally against that internet shutdown from other countries as well. There are coalitions that have been formed of civil society organizations. There is also the Keep It On campaign that is run by Access Now, which is globally, and that has become a very strong movement against internet shutdowns. And also now I've seen also that Access Now is trying to also reach to the African Commission to see how they can support that regional mechanism to offer the support, because one of the weaknesses of the African Commission is capacity. So to bridge that gap or to enhance the capacity, then civil society organizations provide a lot of support. If you look at the declaration itself, the provisions of the declaration and some of the instruments, now there is a new resolution, is it still new, on information integrity, access to data, the one on internet shutdowns. Those resolutions are submitted or adopted by the African Commission. Some of them, most of them, they stem from activism or advocacy by civil society organizations who then approach the African Commission. There's also another one that people don't talk about a lot on surveillance, a resolution which gives the African Commission the mandate to develop a general comment around those issues as well. So that also has been the push of the civil society organization, and they have been very active in developing the instruments If you look at the former Special Rapporteur, Commissioner Lawrence Mute, whether it's Advocate Pansy Takula, or the other ones, their mandate or their mechanisms have been successful because of the support that came from civil society organizations. Some of them have been victims of these violations that we are talking about, who then, based on their experience, push for some of these initiatives. One other thing that I wanted to say that probably civil society can provide support in this context is where she was saying that capacitating young people, to responsibly use digital platforms. This, by the way, is not just about young people, it's about everyone who is in these platforms. We are lagging behind as a continent as far as media literacy is concerned, digital literacy is concerned, and in our activities as civil society organizations, we like throwing around the word digital literacy a lot, media literacy a lot, but what are those exact activities that we are doing or mechanisms that we have adopted as a digital rights organization to facilitate digital literacy? I was asking a colleague, I think he was seated somewhere there, he says they are working with young people, and I said, what exactly are you doing as far as digital rights is concerned for young people? What does it look like? What does it mean? For a school now, in our curriculum, don't you think that we have children they are born with a digital footprint because the mother decided that during their pregnancy, they already have the child online. By the time they are born, they are already in the digital space up to time they are an adult. Shouldn't the curriculum then now, school curriculum, have an element of digital literacy and media literacy as well? Shouldn't we now be talking about things such as cybersecurity as, basic knowledge that as a person who is in the digital space, this is basic knowledge that I should have, not knowledge that Kiktanet is having because they are digital rights organizations, but because I am a digital citizen as well. Coming to the role of civil society organizations, there are organizations that have the capacity to push for digital and media literacy, that have the resources, financial resources. Some of them have human resources, they have the expertise. They can actually partner with the relevant institutions or stakeholders such as the education departments to try and push for media literacy from elementary level going upwards. And also some of them work with communities and see how they can work with communities. She was talking about journalists as well. Now I just wanted to point out that yes, newsrooms, but now we have an expanded definition of who is in the media. We have influencers who are now more popular than the national broadcaster, or having more influence than the national broadcaster, with 1 million followers and all that. And what do we say about those ones? We have a situation in South Africa where maybe some of you know Mark G. He has more than, 1.5 million followers from across the continent. And that guy, when he speaks, whatever Mark G says on his platform, you cannot say no, because the followers will come for you. Now there is a case of hate speech before the courts, because Mark G, but when you go to the comments, he was wrong by any standards. But the following is supporting them. It speaks to issues of, how are we using the way, whether I'm an influencer or am I just a follower commenting. It just shows the level of understanding of the issues by just reading the comments that people post there. So that's the role of also civil society organizations on how we can also engage, with content creators as well, and provide some capacity to them. Some of them, of course, will be very arrogant. They can even go ahead of you and start addressing why they should not be regulated. So there are those things. So I think that civil society does have a role to play in supporting the implementation at national level, working with access to information commissions, working with relevant stakeholders and the state apparatus itself, the security sector itself, you would find that there are cases that have a digital rights component, and there are officers who were trained many years ago, and now somebody comes in and brings in a case of technology facilitated violence against a child, against a woman, and they start asking you, so you recorded yourself, so you posted it online, can we see the video, can you send it to us, such kind of thing. So there are a lot of capacity gaps as well that are in those institutions or sectors that are supposed to help us as the public. And so supporting, regional bodies, supporting national mechanisms, providing education. So, we can't be crowding over certain issues. I think there is space for everyone to focus on particular issues. Some focus on AI ethics. Some are focusing on technology-facilitated violence against children or women. We have others that have a regional footprint. And others are working with young people. Others are working with grassroots organizations. But there is a role that we can play. The digital age is here, it's not going anywhere. We might as well shape up.
Thank you, Hlengi. I think if you spoke to the average Kenyan politician about the advent of the digital age and whether it's going anywhere or not, they'll give you a different response. I think the government's response to the digital age has been to act like it's not happening and to push back against young people and make young people the villains of the story. And I want to bring Sylvia back to the conversation because I feel like part of the problem, which is just what Hlengi is saying, is that the regulators look at issues from their lens rather than from the lens of the users, right? So like with Njeri, when she came up with this platform, there was no way that that platform could have been used for good. It must be because we want to push back against the government, right? So I would like you to speak to, if you had a wish list or if you had a conversation with regulators, with the state, how would young people better be involved in the conversation around regulation of these spaces? And extending even as far as how we come up with regulations, because for the most part, young people are not in these conversations. In fact, they're the targets of regulations. So how can we better involve young people, including in the drafting of the regulations?
Great. Maybe I'll first start with what's there, what the status quo is. So I'd say previously, in terms of how laws and policies were made, and I think I'll focus more on laws at the national level and in parliament, that is, it's been a very direct manner. When I say direct, I mean a traditional manner. So if a bill is proposed on the floor of the House, it is read for the first time, and then once it goes to the committee stage, that's when the committee will ask for views. But the committee would only ask for views previously. I'm going to first start with previously, like about before COVID, actually, just before COVID, you had to go physically for the sittings in parliament, and those used to be held at the county hall. So you had to actually, and this is in Kenya, so you actually had to go give your views then. So you can imagine this is the national parliament representing all Kenyans from across the country, and you have to be in Nairobi to give your views for a specific bill. But COVID changed the way things work. And so what happened is Parliament had to adopt a digital way. And when I say digital, I actually just mean email. And so Parliament opened up an email address, and so now we can send in our memoranda with email. We don't have to go directly to Parliament. And I'm sure many of us did that, especially this year and last year with the finance bill. So that has been happening since COVID. That's what necessitated Parliament. So you can imagine then what young person, just giving an example of someone who is probably in school, or even if they're not in school, but they're below 25, let me give that range, and they have to, there's something that perhaps affects them. Maybe it's on health, maybe it's on agriculture, and they're from a county that has a lot of agricultural products. How would they be expected to go to Parliament and give their views, one, or even sit down go through an entire bill that is filled with so much legalese, especially if it's an amendment bill, it's even worse. If it's a statutory amendment bill, you know, the one that has all these laws, the miscellaneous rather bill, it's times 10, you know, it's terrible. They would not be able to go through all that. And so what has happened is there has been a lot of apathy up until 2024. So this is what we've also noted as an organization. Up until 2024, there was a lot of apathy in what Parliament does. It's more of what does the MP do on the ground? What does the Member of Parliament do on the ground? And so I think the Reject Finance Bill 2024 changed how young people view Parliament, how young people understand the roles that's played by the executive and the legislature, and how young people participate. So as a result, there have been several platforms that have come up in response to trying to ensure young people participate. I know the Attorney General has a public participation tool. Some civil society organizations have also developed some public participation tools to allow young people to participate. But at the point of invitation. So again, now Parliament has also changed tact now. So for you to go give your views, you have to have been invited by Parliament. You can send in your email, but those who will actually go present before the parliamentary committee have to receive a letter, and you have to show it at the door, or you won't enter, which again beats the point. So I'd say in terms of young people participating in developing these policies and regulations is a bit different, but for the laws, you know, it's been quite a struggle. They've had to carve out their own spaces. They've had to develop their own campaigns, national campaigns on specific issues to push their point across. But they've also learned that there's power in leveraging what's already there, what's existing, on structures that already exist and have access. So you'll find, for example, Siasa Place is currently part of the youth serving organization. So this is a network that brings together all youth serving organizations in Kenya. And so they work together to draft memoranda. They work together with other established civil society organizations that perhaps have this access to access Parliament. And with time, they've received that recognition and they've managed to do that. But again, this is just civil society organizations. Not all of them can reach every part of the country. So more needs to be done. Yeah, what we've seen is young people want to engage. Young people have views and on so many things and in such a diverse way that you wouldn't even have thought about it. But they need to be included. They need to be brought on board. And there are very different ways of doing it. What we've seen is ministries have tried, I would try to say, in terms of how they convene stakeholder meetings. Some ministries go across the country, so looking into different counties. So there's that opportunity for more young people to participate. But that is still not enough, I would say. That is not enough. More needs to be done. And so the space that's there currently, young people had to push for it. They had to force their way in, if that is actually the word that I would have to say. And of course, with where we are going, we already know that young people form a large majority of the country, and in fact, even a larger majority of the voting population. And if we are not able to include them, then we will have a problem, especially for regulations and for laws that affect them directly. I like what Grace said, the digital natives. These are people who've been born. You know Instagram. You know, there are some things you didn't learn later in life. You grew up, you weren't born knowing it, but you grew up knowing these platforms. And so the laws that are there, the policies that are there, have to have their views, have to have their input into the process. And another thing is not just having a policy for the sake of it. It also has to be very agile. We have to, as a state, we have to be very understanding that things change. Things change very quickly in the digital space. What was there yesterday is not what's going to be there by December. It's going to be very different. So there has to be that rapid, quick feedback that can then inform what goes on. And in doing that, not only do we not regulate the space to ensure that our rights are protected, that young people are able to express themselves freely, and to ensure that we have a thriving democracy, but to also protect them. We've noted the dangers that are there. We have to ensure that as much as we are protecting their rights, we are protecting them and ensuring that no ill will is used on these platforms, and using young people as a conduit for this. Yeah.
Thank Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you to every one of my panelists. I would just like to open up the floor now to questions, comment, feedback. We have a few minutes. I'd just like to hear what the room thinks about this balancing between national security, using, of course, surveillance and digital freedoms. And so if you have a question or comment that you would like to make, please raise your hand. And you can also tell us who you would like to address your question or comment to. So anyone with a question or comment? Okay, so I see one hand on that end, and I'll start with you. A second hand here, so let's start with those two.
Hello and good afternoon, I think. First of all, thank you so much for this very invigorating panel. I have taken copious notes. Thank you so much. This was amazing. My name is Gentrix Wanyama. I'm an advocate of the High Court, currently practicing law, technology, media and telecommunications law at the law firm of Kiptines and Odhiambo Associates. Very happy to be here. Thank you so much. Because of how invigorating it was, I have many questions, but I'll try and limit myself. My question really could be addressed to any of the panelists, but it comes from the issue of the democratic backsliding, as I think Grace called it, when it comes to countries or governments borrowing authoritarian practices from each other and getting that confidence from one another. For me, from where I sit, I find that the people have held a lot of power in kind of slowing down this trend. Governments will try and carry out abductions or arrests, but then when people really come out strongly, call for the release of so-and-so, free so-and-so, find so-and-so, we tend to see a bit more action than we saw previously. But there's also the problem of what I sometimes call demonstration fatigue, especially when these instances are on the rise every other day. You're having to always be on the lookout. And so my question is, how do we, while encouraging especially young people to keep being vigilant and to keep participating, how do we ensure that there is sustainability, if I can call it that? How do we ensure that they are well supported? And how do we ensure that these spaces, even though we know they're not completely safe, how do we ensure that they're able to keep on participating in the democratic process despite these challenges? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Palma, the poet. I am a spoken word artist and also an activist and also a social media influencer advocating against injustices happening in our country. So my question is directed to Madam Dube from South Africa. And my question is, as an activist and activist, using digital platforms to raise awareness on community issues, I have faced challenges like having my Instagram account being taken down. So my question is, are we really safe online as activists or activists? What steps can we take as activists to protect ourselves online, both in terms of digital security and also preventing our voices from being silenced from the rogue government? Thank you.
So how can they protect themselves while they're using online spaces? I know Tlengiwe has noted your question. There's a third question here.
Good afternoon once again. First of all, let me appreciate the fact that it was quite an informative session. Thanks. Let me introduce myself. My name is Peter Edwin. I'm a youth leader at an opposition political party in Kenya known as Wiper Patriotic Front, formerly Wiper Democratic Movement. And I'm also a youth ambassador for an organization known as the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy. So my question is geared towards youth interests. And here's my question. Young people are the majority online and the largest voting bloc as per the data as of 2022 general elections report. What policies should Kenya prioritize to protect youth data from manipulation during elections, especially in the age of AI and targeted political ads? Because of late we have witnessed manipulation of data, especially for young people, considering that in Kenya politics is quote unquote a matter of life and death, if you understand. And it's all about numbers, and these numbers are going to be greatly influenced by AI and technology. So specifically, I'd like Grace Bomo to respond to this, because she's at a position, especially being a specialist on matters data privacy. I think she's better placed to answer the question, but also the rest can participate if they feel like they can add something to it. Thank you so much.
Okay. I see a fourth question here. The microphone is coming to you.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so my name is Albright Alitsi. I'm a social science student graduate, and I'm a disability activist, and I'm the founder of Lola Crochet Foundation that deals with disability employment in the society, and I'm a proud activist, and yeah, I love crocheting. And so standing here, my question is directed towards all the panelists, and my question is, as we invest in digital innovation for democracy, how are we ensuring that disabled youths, most especially those navigating trauma, are not just included, but leading the design for civic technologies that affirm their dignity and their rights without being forgotten? Yeah.
I see more hands are coming up. I'll start with my colleague Julie here, and then I'll come to those two.
Thank you, Luciana. Insightful presentation, ladies. Julie Lugulu, a teacher of law at Kabarak University. So my question to any of the panelists is that what measures are necessary to protect digital rights and privacy to ensure free expression and participation without the fear of repression in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'll start with the gentleman and then the lady, and then we'll have the panelists respond.
Thank you for this chance to raise this issue. And the issue I want to raise or ask is directed to Ms. Dube. And it's on the issue of policies. Compatibility of these policies, national level policies and regional policies on digital rights. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Stanley Wamangu. I'm a digital rights advocate and convener of Haki Digital Initiative. So I'm asking, how do we go about the issue of compatibility, especially on a regional level, because we have different priorities as African countries. And in this context of democracy is particularly important for Kenya, and how we can go about that issue in other African countries and have a more integrated continental framework is important, but how we also navigate different priorities. Like for some African countries, the priorities are about democracy and civic space restrictions. Others are about national security. Others are about creating employment, utilizing digital technologies to create employment. So how can we navigate this and still find enough space to talk about or to make improvements on these issues of digital rights in our continental and regional policy and legal frameworks? Thank you.
Thank you. I think there was a lady as well who had a question.
Thank you very much, Luciana, and also thank you to our amazing panelists for the amazing session that we've had. My name is Louisa Odingo. I am the project lead for the Africa Artificial Intelligence Policy Lab by the Lawyers Hub. So my question can be addressed by either of the panelists. We have a lot of emerging technologies such as AI, artificial intelligence, digital ID systems that are fast spreading across Africa. So what do you see as the most urgent or pressing safeguards that need to be taken or put in place to ensure that, one, we protect human rights and democracy, but also we strike a balance between public security and privacy, as well as democratic participation of both the youth and the public in general? Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa. I'll allow the Okay, I see there's one
Okay,
more.
good afternoon, everyone. My
Good
name
afternoon.
is Joel Miner from Amnesty International Kenya. Mine is not specifically a question, but just to thank the panelists for that insightful conversation. And again, on what my friend Sylvia has mentioned on the Computer Misuse and Cyber Crimes Act, even when you look at the amendment bill of 2024, it is making it has used even more vague terms. And even if you look at the Kicker Bill 2025, again, it even came up with other ways indirectly to violate people's privacy and issues of data protection. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. So let me allow the panelists to respond in the order in which they're seated. So let's start with Grace, then we'll have Sylvia, and then we'll have Flengi.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to refer to I attended another foundation, I don't know how to say it in French, this foundation event at Strathmore University as Innovation Foundation for Democracy event sometime back at Strathmore University where Professor Bembe was speaking. And that question that Gentrick has asked about getting fatigued also came up. Because he was speaking about reinventing democracy, infusing African perspectives. And then somebody said, but what is democracy? We are being fought left, right, and center. Does it even really work? And I thought it was so interesting that he spoke about some sort of a paradigm shift, because the fact that we still have some power and still have some action going on, including the tensions that we are fighting right now, because there's a lot of power in digital, but we are it's also being this clawback at the same time. I thought that is interesting because I think it is a design of the anti-democracy league to make you think you're fatigued, or to make you think that there's nothing to achieve by, viewing or retweeting, or because which is the interesting thing about the digital space. Even just viewing a tweet, because the whole platform is built on surveillance, it makes it be viewed by more people, right? Even if you don't retweet or do anything, the fact that the eyes are on you, the fact that you stared, there was a 20-second, you stayed for 20 seconds on that particular, that is counted as, oh, this is interesting, so the views go up, and so on other people's walls, or what do you call them, timelines, it comes up. And sometimes I think we need to shift our view and remember that this is why there is response from all sorts of spaces. Sometimes we need to also think of the wins. We've spoken about the case of Rose Njeri. As much as we are saddened by the fact that why did she have to spend time in one of the worst police stations, but at the end of the day, it's a win that even the judiciary was saying, this is such a trumped-up charge, we cannot even admit it. Sometimes I think, and I know it's a very Kenyan thing, and let me explain for the non-Kenyans here that sometimes our style of democracy is also to be quite critical. I think it's part of our societal DNA. But sometimes we also have to think of the wins and how some of our actions are leading to betterment of the future. So that's something I wanted to say. Then I know time is not on our side, but I want to, first of all, appreciate Peter for being in a political party. That is such a great thing for a young person to be doing. I hope your political party encourages more people, and I hope that you're creating space and talking about youth issues in the political party and not just being used to check box that there are young people in the party. And I hope to see you somewhere in our national or regional politics in future. on the issue of targeted political ads and data manipulation, it is true that is what is being done, not just in Kenya, but Kenya is a good case study. Even in the US, the gerrymandering that is happening right now is happening because they have studied the data and they have profiled the voters. But I also want to say that there is space and we need to look for political accountability from the political actors. And so I don't want to call your party small, but the smaller political parties or the smaller political actors could come together and demand accountability, because it tends to happen so often that the manipulation, the sources of the data are from government databases. This was the case. There was a study done by Strathmore University, one of the centers at Strathmore University about the 2017 election. It was actually the voter register that was used to profile people. And you know, here in Kenya, profiling is not necessarily, one level of profiling is just looking at your name, which is why I love my name. I know most people, where do you come from? Then I tell them, Nairobi. I know, but where do you really come from? You know, that kind of profiling from your name to be able to, try and gauge your political leaning, which is what young people are. They're defying that by having political leanings that do not necessarily align with the previous generations where it was just about your ethnicity. So I think we can seek political accountability. We can follow the money, because it takes money for you to do this kind of profiling, for you to send the bulk SMSs that you send to people, for you to send all those WhatsApps messages. You can follow that trail. There's a guy called Odanga who has done very good research showing that, and Sylvia talked about it, there's an economic aspect to it. All this misinformation and profiling and everything that is happening in the political space is also partly because people don't have jobs, but they have the skills. So when they are paid and told, create for me a profile of all the people who care about roads or care about this particular issue, they are able to. So we can follow the money, we can seek political accountability through the political accountability routes that are there. Even if the political accountability routes, the ones that are in the law do not work, we can also seek political accountability from bringing the community together, like is happening right now with all these campaigns that are being done by young people, the so-called Gen Z kind of accountability. So I think I can't answer the question fully. Maybe it's something we can discuss further. But congratulations on being in a political party. That's awesome.
Okay, so I'll try to attempt to answer some of the questions. How do we ensure this sustainability, again, in participation, continuous participation? I think from our experience as Siasa Place is leveraging on others, working with others. There is strength in working with others. You can't do it alone. And so perhaps I think there is need for us to consider as a movement, let me, if I could call it that, this movement, on how we have to keep passing on the baton. It can't be the same people all the time doing the same things. We really have to be creative and see how we can work this around. But again, I think that's also food for thought, because this perhaps is not the first, but in recent years, I'd say that we are seeing very many young people come together for this at this scale. So we really have to be creative, we have to be agile, and we have to keep thinking. In terms of data protection of the youth data, I think this is going now to bring me back to election. If I go back to election material and things, for me, we need an audit of the voter register. We need access to the voter register. We need an audit of the voter register. Then we can make informed decisions from there, because I think the current voter register as it is already has some fundamental problems that need to be addressed and looked at, but without access to it at this point. But that then again brings over the whole conversation about IEBC, which has just been constituted, which has not yet settled. So there's a lot, I think, on that angle. Maybe you can sit with Luciana and I, and we can discuss a bit more of that. That's a lot of the work we do. Then in terms of I'll merge the questions regarding emerging tech, the safeguards for emerging tech, as well as what measures we require to protect our rights from fear of repression. So on emerging tech, I think I'd go back to what Grace spoke about. Look at the tech that we have from source to end. We always look at the end product, but how did we get there? Who actually inputs this data? And as she mentioned, there's currently strategic litigation going on in the courts regarding the content workers, if I could call them, those who input the data. And Siasa Place as well is involved in that because we support these workers who work in this, if I could call them institutes, that support then these big companies. We see the ChatGPTs and the Meta. So we really have to follow through the process. If we are able as civil society to be involved at every stage of the process, then we can be able to ensure that there's specific change that we would like to see. And then, of course, we look at specific instances. For the tech, there's specific instances. There are unique issues for each of them. How do we address that? Do we need to have parliamentary engagement? Do we need to push for specific laws? Do we need policies at regional level? Do we need perhaps to engage with specific regulators? Is it the ODPC that we need to work with? That looking at that multi-stakeholder collaboration is a key way to looking at it. In terms of fear of repression and the rights that we have, I'd say the key thing would go, in Kenya specifically, would be not just the regulatory and legal framework, but also the push that citizens give. I'd say the citizens' involvement. As Gentrix rightly mentioned, when there is that public pressure, we see things happening. We see some form of change, if I could call it that, no matter how minimal it is. And so it's just a plea. This is actually a plea to encourage more Kenyans, more young Kenyans, to keep coming out, to keep speaking out, whether you're on the ground or even online. I liked what someone said about participating in a protest, even when you're in the UK or wherever you are in the world. You're still able to support the people that you're with, the movement. And so I'd say citizens' involvement is very important. We are seeing a rise of that. I'd also say placing pressure in the right places. We really need to push Parliament as an entity. We've seen there have been a lot of gaps in terms of parliamentary oversight. We've seen there's been a lot of gaps in terms of how laws are originated and eventually passed. And so how then do we make a concerted effort to ensure that there is some form of push and support and pressure on these people that we actually sent there to do the work? And of course, strategic litigation. Strategic litigation is always, I'd say, a great guardrail for our rights, especially those entrenched in the Constitution. And I'd say pre and post. Pre, you can see something from afar. You've seen there's a loophole in law. You need a constitutional interpretation. You need some guidance from the courts. That could happen. And post, the harm has already taken place, the constitutional violation has already happened, and so then how would the courts interpret this and support that? That's what I would say.
What to respond to? I swear some of the questions I've forgotten them. But I'll respond to what I still remember. I'll start with the issue of, let me also commend Peter, yes, for being a politician, on a young politician on the African continent. And my just advice is that when we are looking at this issue of digital rights, digital innovation, as a young person now, I'm looking at you to do things differently. How do you, as a young politician in the digital age, behave differently from those ones? How do you take advantage of the technologies at your disposal now, technologies which were not at the disposal of those that were practicing politics, let's say in 1980, 1990, and all that. But how do you take advantage of the technologies also in a responsible way as well?
So within the political setup or the movement, you should also be addressing issues related to digital democracy. You should be looking into issues of, I think you asked also about the protection of young people as well. What is cybersecurity? What does cybersecurity mean to you as a political party? Does your political party think about cybersecurity? It's a political issue. It's not just an issue to be, spoken about by, those in IT. It's a political issue as well. You have your systems, digital systems as a political party. How do you protect them? She was talking about data protection. What is data protection to you as a political party? What is protection of personal information to you as a political party? And how can you push for data protection, that movement, nationally? And there are also issues related to digital exclusion. We have a lot of young people, although we have so many young people that are in digital spaces, but we have many of them that are not in the spaces. How do you address digital exclusion as a political party, specifically for young people, so that they can also equally benefit from using the technologies? We're speaking about, rights being protected offline and online. So those are some of the things that we have to think about as a political, how to mainstream issues of digital rights within the political movement. Then some of the questions that you are asking here will become easier for you because this becomes part of your ecosystem as a political party. She spoke about persons with disabilities. How do you engage persons with disabilities as a political party, looking at a digital rights perspective? But to answer your question around persons with disabilities, I'm relying on the concept that no one should be left behind, including persons with disabilities, but also all groups that are, whether they are vulnerable or whether they are marginalized, they have to be specific measures as well. I'm drawing from the declaration that I was talking about, that there should be specific measures targeted at persons with disabilities, rural communities, women, children, taking into account the evolving capacities of children, different minorities that we have in society. And for persons with disabilities, there are standards also that have been developed specifically to target the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the digital age. If you look at the protocol to the African Charter, there's a disability protocol. I can't remember the exact articles, but there's the specific provisions that relate to digital inclusion as well. Those can be transposed to national situations or the jurisdiction here in Kenya to see how Kenya is aligning to those standards. 1, 2, you are an activist. It's your role as well to ensure that persons with disabilities are included. You understand better the situation. If you are talking about persons with visual impairments, every time, like the center, we have courses on human rights issues. I always make a point that when I have sessions on persons with disabilities, let's say it's on freedom of expression, it's on air, I'll bring the former special rapporteur, Lawrence Mute, who is an activist and an academic with a disability, to speak to the issues based on experience, not based on, what I can read and understand that, when it comes to technology, it makes things easier for a person with a disability, but, for a person with a disability actually makes things possible. So it's easier if we have disability movements actually pushing for digital inclusion. I know there are organizations in Kenya. I have a former colleague and a friend who works at ICJ, the international office. He's a very strong advocate of digital inclusion. So inclusion is important, but representation is more important. So as somebody working in human rights, you should also, like what I was saying, think about digital rights in the context of persons with disabilities and
be in a position to craft initiatives that support digital inclusion, whether it's at grassroots level or national level or international level. So inclusion is very important, but also representation is important. I encourage you, especially the disability rights movement, to take up issues of digital rights. I think our colleague mentioned something to do with compatibility of regional standards and national standards, and you spoke about different priorities as countries. We can have different priorities, yes, but when it comes to issues of human rights, those are universal. Democracy, those are universal. You know, sustainable development, those are universal. Probably we're at different levels, we're at different approaches. So the reason why also I wanted to mention that the reason why we have these regional mechanisms is because of these priorities that you are talking about, so that we can also manage the priorities, because some of the priorities gravitate towards repression. So in order to control that repression and bring us back into the fold, we need something to, you know, to kind of, my bundles are depleting, but something that we can rally around and create a common positions. Even when we have different priorities, there is no country that can say it doesn't have a priority which is advancing democracy, or a priority which is advancing human rights or sustainable development. It's also in the how, but the standards are so that we can bring them down to a national level without really having to divert from what can be benchmarks. Right. So also these standards as well, I've seen in the case of Malawi recently, I think this month actually, a very progressive decision from the High Court I think it's the High Court in Malawi, on criminalization of defamation. And there was a heavy reliance on these regional standards, that when you look at the regional standards or the national framework and you don't find somewhere to say we can rely on that one, there is a regional standard that is a higher standard, where you then go to and draw inspiration from there to derive a progressive judgment which can better protect the standards. Protect the rights of the people. The influencer, he mentioned very interesting points about young people. You know, they are very active, they are using the space, very vigilant, and say, how do we encourage young people to be vigilant? I don't think anyone can encourage young people to be vigilant, because they are the ones with the energy. The reservoir of energy resides within the young people. They're actually driving movements, and we are, some of us no longer fit into the definition of of young people being a youth, and we are looking up to you as young people to even drive, you know, certain national agendas, and use the energy that you have, use the knowledge that you have, use the platform, the digital platforms that you have as young people. There's the repression that is there as well, but young people have, you know, shown to be very creative and very innovative. But the advice then to also be vigilant also of the repression which is existing as you use the platforms. You know, there was a reference to manipulation of the spaces. There was reference of, you know, surveillance and all that. I was also just talking about cybersecurity, but so you should be mindful of those mechanisms that as you enjoy, you know, the digital space and use it very creatively to push certain agendas, also being mindful of digital repression and how to navigate around that digital repression. And also when you are in trouble now, maybe now there is a case which is involved, know the ecosystem
which are the organizations or, law firms that work on these areas that can provide expert support for you should you find yourself in trouble, because sometimes life will be lifing, things will happen, and you will need certain stakeholders to come to your corner and support you, probably in a litigation case or to push advocacy in a certain way. And as you are an influencer, you are in a position where you can positively influence society, but you can also be in a position where you can drive what she was talking about: misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. So you should also, I think there should be some consortiums or certain movements of content creators as well that, push for ethics, so that you then don't find yourself now pushing hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, or making certain pronouncements, probably that, speak, in ways that violate vulnerable groups in society, maybe such as women. So I think there has to be that kind of, it's good to be on the internet and using the platforms, whether you're in TikTok or on Instagram, but you should also be mindful of, the ethics and be responsible, such that you then do not find yourself as a purveyor of hate speech or misinformation and disinformation. So when it comes to issues around regulation, we should not only be thinking about the media. Like I say, there are also young people who are using the space as well that do not have the knowledge around ethics. With a journalist, they go to journalism school, they learn about media law, they learn about ethics, they learn about so many things that, there are so many don'ts that you can, that you have to adhere to when you are a journalist, which is the knowledge that most content creators or some content creators do not have. Then that's why you find yourself then now on the other side. You have made certain pronouncements that you are not supposed to make, but if you had the knowledge of certain ethics, you would not have, made. Yes, on the continent, really, when it comes to democracy, there is backsliding, which is we are witnessing. In South Africa during the elections last year, there was the term which they were using, young people, they were saying is democracy fatigue. That, there is this, South Africa got independence in 1994, now is 2024, what has democracy done for you? So there is also that even young people are getting tired of the word or phrase or concept around democracy as well. You can even see now there's a bit of backlash when it comes to institutions such as the Human Rights Commission. There's, instead of supporting the Human Rights Commission, there's trolling of the Human Rights Commission. And I was talking to a colleague recently. I was doing a research on democratic resilience. So I was saying I don't think there is much of democratic resilience on the continent. In fact, we have a deficit when it comes to that part, and there are so many examples, democracy gaps, a lot of them that exist that we should be dealing with, and there are very good examples of bad examples of that democratic backsliding on the continent that we are seeing. But in terms of enjoying the rights without repression, I think there are so many elements that contribute to it. If we have an independent judiciary, that is very important, because we have mentioned issues to do with litigation, people are being taken to court and all that. In that instance, you need an independent judiciary to preside over these cases from an independent perspective. And we have a lot of incidents of the judiciary being captured in so many instances. I'll give an example. I live in South Africa, but I come from Zimbabwe. So I'm sure you have heard Uncle Bob for many years, like he was the darling of the continent, although we had a different perspective back home. I personally judged him from the lifestyle that was lived by a general Zimbabwean, which wasn't looking good. So my admiration was not that much. So the land reform, there was the land reform in Zimbabwe, black people taking land from the whites and all that happened. And that was informed by, history. If you know the history, 1890, the British flag, marks independence in Zimbabwe throughout 1980. There's that land dispossession which happened. There was a question which wasn't answered. But in answering that question of the land, now I'm talking about the judiciary, of answering that land, there has to be the parceling of the land, which ended up even infiltrating into the judiciary, where now you have state apparatus just parceling out pieces of land to the judiciary and things like that. And this is done via not the national, through a party system. And already if it's done through a party system, is the same judge going to be fair when cases are brought? It's via the land reform, correcting the wrongs of the past and all that. But this is coming to a judicial officer. Will there be independence? So we need that. Judicial independence is very important, but also we need a lot of expertise around the issues, so that when it comes to the state authorities or state apparatus as well, they have the requisite knowledge. You have a Human Rights Commission. I did a training on digital rights and invited NANRI, and they say they had done a study on violence against women, and there was nothing digital violence in their report. A whole NANRI is a regional body. So we need to also equip our institutions as well, the National Human Rights Commission, that if it's an issue that has to do with artificial intelligence and it's before the Human Rights Commission, does the commission have the capacity? If it's something to do with access to information, the Commission on Administrative Justice, does it have the capacity? If it's Parliament, does it have the capacity? You were saying something else. I went to Lesotho for a training, and it was so disappointing that, one, there's a data protection law in Lesotho which has been in existence since 2013, which is just nicely decorating their legal statutes without being used. And they did not know in that training that they have a data protection law, which was issued from 2013. So if they don't know, it means it says there should be, a data protection commission. There is no commission to talk about it. No one is even talking about it. And implementation, there is nothing being done. It's just existing. It's there, And some of the parliamentarians were saying we should leave digital issues of technology to children. The other one was even saying she's a grandmother and her grandchildren are the ones who use phones. And at that time when that training was happening, there was a very problematic legislation on cyber crime, cyber security before Parliament, which was supposed to be discussed by the same people who were saying that we should leave issues of technology to children. Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you, Thlengiwe. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Grace. Thank you for an insightful and thoughtful engagement. And I think what come out very clearly from today's conversation is that, yes, there have been shutdowns. We had a really, really bad year last year. There has been a lot of surveillance. There's been very weak oversight. But these are not abstract issues. They're very real issues, will continue to be real for the forthcoming days. Whereas there have been attempts to silence protests, to distort elections, and put democracy at risk, there is also some resilience. Not a lot, but some resilience, even as we go into elections in different parts of Africa. So Grace has reminded us that accountability must start with political actors, because for the most part, manipulation of data is state-driven. Surveillance and disinformation are not just legal issues, they are economic issues. I think Sylvia also spoke to this. It takes money to watch, to disrupt, to deceive people. Thlengiwe has reminded us that it's important to have regional standards, particularly where priorities are more towards repression, but also that it's important for citizens to continue to demand enforcement. Content creators, influencers have a role in creating information and spreading it, but also as purveyors of misinformation. Sylvia has also emphasized that young people are not just waiting on the sidelines. They are currently mobilizing, raising funds, resisting disinformation, and pushing for oversight. But they must also be protected, and they must find ways of protecting themselves. So as Grace has reminded us, even though we feel like there's real fatigue, fatigue is not real. There is some traction that is being made. We are not where we were. But progress will continue to depend on our creativity, our capacity for coalition building, and passing on the baton so that advocacy remains agile. So As we go forward, I think what is clear is that citizen involvement is essential. As we develop laws, as we develop frameworks, if we don't involve citizens, there will not be meaningful engagement. If parliaments are not held to account and pressure put in the right places, we will not push back against repression. But again, this technological revolution is unstoppable. The real question is, will it be used to empower or will it be used to repress? If governments and regulators and citizens choose wisely, then we'll use it to enforce accountability. And then we'll have digital spaces becoming foundations of democracy as opposed to weapons against democracy. The choice is ours and the moment to act is now. With that, allow me to bring this to a close and to thank you all for your active participation. Thank you. So I'll hand